Hey everyone, Chris Carter here, the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's Monday. We're back here for the week as the Steelers get ready to finish out the preseason. But I got to look at one of the bigger questions that was about this team going into training camp and the preseason. Are they becoming the bullies of the trenches that we thought that they could be going into this season? We'll answer that question, look harder at the defensive line, and talk about their passing chemistry all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. You can find me here every day, Monday through Friday on the Locked On Steelers podcast, breaking down the Steelers. We're happy to be your first listen every day because we're your team every day. All right, Steelers fans, we are through 2 preseason games. Training camp's over. And one of the biggest things we talked about all offseason was the Steelers needed to become stronger in the trenches. And not just on one side of the ball, but both sides of the ball. Of course, towards the end of last season, the Steelers' run defense got trampled by the Ravens in a bad way. And big part of the reason when we looked at the film was the interior defensive line just wasn't strong enough. They were getting pushed around too much, which got to the linebackers, and everything else crumbled around that. On the flip side, they needed this offensive line to finally step into being the group that they've been investing into. You look at the past few years, the Steelers have invested 2 first-round picks in Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu at offensive tackle, a second-round pick into Frazier, and a fourth-round pick into Mason McCormick. And the big question is, are they any closer to being those bullies that we talked about them potentially being? And on the flip side, also the defensive line needs to be that. They've invested a first-round pick in Derrick Harmon and a second-round pick in Keeanu Benton and a fifth-round pick, Y.A. Black. Normally, you don't think a fifth-round pick would factor in, but he has. And I think there's a mixed answer to this question because I do think the Steelers are getting pretty much the 2 aspects of the 3 aspects that they really want to get down here from the guys that they've invested into to make them the bullies or the goons, as Mike Tomlin has told his players he wants them to be. And I think the first thing they've gotten down is when it comes to pass protection, this offensive line looks a lot sharper. They're picking up blitzes. Broderick Jones, I thought, looked pretty good in that regard on tape for a second preseason game in a row. That's encouraging. I thought Troy Fautanu looked really sharp there. I thought Zach Frazier managed the middle of the offensive line pretty well against Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey, one of my favorite defensive tackle pairs in the NFL to watch just because they're 2 really talented guys and they're very diverse skill sets. I think they can throw a lot of different things at you. I thought that they handled that well. But we haven't seen the offensive line be bullies in the run game yet. And I think that is something that is becoming an area of concern. I'll also say I never saw it really during training camp. And granted, they were going up against the Steelers' first defense a lot. And the Steelers' first defense, as we'll talk about in a little bit here, looks pretty good against the run right now. And they're doing a much better job of winning at the line of scrimmage there. And so I thought, okay, let's give them time. Well, now we have 2 preseason games. The first team offense, I believe, has had a total of 4, or at least the first team offensive line has had a total of 4 drives together. And they haven't really done the thing when it comes to moving the ball consistently on the ground. Now, you got to say, grace to being they didn't run the ball a whole lot. Caleb Johnson only ran the ball 8 times in the first game. I think a few of those times are actually with the second team offense. And then in week 2 against the Buccaneers, the Steelers really didn't run the ball at all with him with the first team offense. He ran a lot more with the second team and third team offenses. And that's where he started to find his groove. Now, I do think there's a mixed bag here when it comes to the running game situation for the offensive line. And we'll get to the defense in a second here too. But I think that the part of this is the running backs need to feel comfortable running behind the offensive line and need to trust what's there. I think Caleb Johnson didn't trust himself. That's something we talked about on the show. Mike Tomlin talked about, and we even had Caleb Johnson admitting about going into this preseason game that he needed to be better at. And I thought he was a little bit better at that. He had a 14-yard run where he had a nice cutback behind the offensive line, kind of just sweeping the Buccaneers defense to the right. I thought it was Dylan Cook, who had a good job sealing one side, and then Connor Hayward sealed the backside, and that gave him a crease to attack. I thought there were a few other runs that he had that were pretty solid. But Caleb Johnson I think is still learning the pace of what the Steelers are going to need from him in certain spots and how to work with this first team offensive line. We still haven't seen really Jaylen Warren run with this group against another team. But the thing is, when we saw him in training camp, it also was kind of underwhelming at times. And that could just because, hey, it's training camp. They're not trying to go too hard at times, that Jaylen Warren that is. But I do think there's going to be questions about why this offensive line isn't putting more effort into trying to get trying to get the run game going, when that was a key part of who they were last season. Even when they weren't efficient with running the ball, you knew that they were running the ball, and that was going to be something that you had to account for. I'm going to break down that aspect of this conversation in the third segment. But getting back to the Bullies part, this is where you want to hope that you can see them build confidence. Now, I will say this. What you're hoping when I'm talking about Bullies, I'm talking about when they line up at the line of scrimmage. You're expecting your guys to be the guys that consistently win the line of scrimmage. The offensive line creates space. They chip to the backers. They create holes for the running backs, and they protect the quarterback. On the defensive front, you're not allowing them to create space. In fact, you're pushing them backwards, or you're at least making sure your linebackers are clean so that they can attack the run game and play, and also attack the quarterback and read what's going on a lot cleaner. And those are things I think the Steelers, I think the Steelers are getting down. We'll talk about that part in the next segment. But the nastiness, the meanness, where you see just the overpowering that you say, I think that's still going to take some time, because that comes when you're so confident in your coordination as a unit and an offensive line. And I know I always give the example of Pouncey and DeCastro and how DeCastro injured Pouncey one time, but there's also just the chemistry of knowing, hey, when we call this play is going to hit. Like one of the Steelers' best run plays with Le'Veon Bell was when they had two guys pulling at the same time. Sometimes it was Pouncey and DeCastro, sometimes it was DeCastro and I think Villanueva might have did it once or twice. Or I think Ramon Foster kicked in, but they would have their guys pull. Pouncey was a really good pulling center. He was really athletic to get that happen, and they knew, hey, when we do this play, Foster and Villanueva can crash down the line from the left side. These guys pull to the left, and they're all of a sudden they are kicking out two guys there, and that's creating the synergy and the power at the point of attack that you want to if you're the Steelers offense. This offense still needs to find its bread and butter run plays. Is it the wide zone? Is it the inside zone? Is it a gap power? Is it a trap? That they have not created yet, but I think it's fine because they're still looking for that. And I think that this is still a very young offensive line with a rookie running back that eventually is going to, they're hoping will ascend to in the RB1 role. And that's going to take time. And I think that that's something that hasn't manifested yet. So they're not bullies on the offensive line, but the defensive line, I do think we're seeing some signs that they could be that. And it kind of goes back to what I said about training camp, right? Remember in those early weeks when the offense couldn't win a 7 shots drill and the defense was crushing the offense and 11 on 11s. And I kept telling people, hey, they're winning these, but defenses also often win first because it's easier for them to get coordinated and just attack. I think a similar thing could happen with the Steelers offensive line in the season. As the offense shapened up throughout training camp, we saw them win more 7 shots. We saw them win more 11 on 11s. We saw them look more coordinated and like they understood what was coming at them and how to counter different things. That's just against your own team. Eventually, they're also going to need that coordination and that chemistry to build as they prepare to face other teams and face various attacks week after week and have to study and understand, okay, this week we faced a team that ran a three-man front or an odd man front. This week we're facing a team with an even man front. And there's different ways to counter that. And, this team likes to blitz with their linebackers. This team likes to hold back and do different things. Those are the things that are going to eventually develop over time. But that's what has to happen with this offensive line. If that happens and they do become the bullies, that changes the dynamic of this team and puts them in the situation that I think could make them much more serious threats, especially in the later part of the years when you get to December and January when it gets colder and you want that run game to wear down opposing defenses. That has got to be a key for the Steelers offense to achieve throughout the season. It doesn't have to happen right now. It'd be lovely if it did for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but if they can be on a positive trajectory to get there, and they actually do get there by, say, October, November's time, and then that starts to become a part of the offense while they've been able to maintain a winning record, stay in the playoff hunt, the passing game with Aaron Rodgers and the defense is working, and now all of a sudden the run game comes along, that could make them the bullies that become a dangerous threat to other teams if they get that aspect to their offense going. But I want to talk about the aspect of the bullying that the defensive line is showing, because I think there are some very encouraging signs that they are starting to find their legs there in doing that part of the job. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. Be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything: cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. I found that therapy isn't just for navigating major challenges in my life, it's also for building those positive coping skills that help you learn how to set boundaries and move forward, keeping those skills throughout your life. With therapy from BetterHelp, you'll not just be helped for a moment, but you can learn how to help yourself for a lifetime. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, your host here as we continue our Monday show. Now we do get to talk to coordinators today at the Steelers facility. I'll be on hand for that. There's a question I have for Arthur Smith that I think is pertinent to the way they've been conducting their offense in these first two preseason games. But we'll get to that in the next segment. So that's a little tease there. But I want to talk about the defensive line. And I wrote about this. I'm actually writing about this for the Pittsburgh Post, because it should be up by midday Monday. So if you're seeing this in the morning, look up around probably like noonish, and you'll probably see this film study in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But I do think that the defensive line is finding its strength in helping be better in stuffing the run. And part of it comes from what I saw out of Derrick Harmon, because in the first game against the Jaguars, I thought that the people who were really down on Derrick Harmon because he didn't get a notch on the official stat sheet were being a little too over dramatic. There were some things that he could have cleaned up for sure. But when you look at, I think it's Pro Football Focus, they registered him with 2 pressures, and one of those pressures, one pressure didn't even count because he got erased by the Isaiah Loudermilk roughing the passer. But I thought he did some good things. But sure, there were things to work on. But the thing that I saw he really needed to work on was sometimes when the Jaguars would double team him out of the hole, they would get their hands to him a little quicker, and he couldn't establish leverage, and he'd get pushed back. And then you saw the Jaguars get like a 5 or a 6 yard run here and there. And there were sometimes I felt he could have asserted control over his gap a little bit better. And in this game, I thought I saw him do it. Now, I did my bonus episode right after the Steelers game. You could check that out on our YouTube and our podcasting channels that came out very early Sunday for you to get. And I showed my clip of talking to Derrick Harmon and what he said about it. But I do think that when I was able to watch the film a little bit closer over the course of the rest of Sunday and break things down, and you'll see it in this film study that I do for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But I do think that Derrick Harmon, there was a point for him to do that because he was so direct with how he was addressing the Buccaneers offensive line in this second preseason game. And he won so many reps against the run and the pass because of how he was able to use his size and his leverage to just take control of the opposing player and win and make sure that he was the person in control of his gap, especially against the run. Now, his sack came against I think it was a rookie offensive lineman on the second team offense for the Buccaneers. But some of the run stuffs that the Steelers had, even if it wasn't directly involving Derrick Harmon, were really good signs of him being able to win at the point of attack against first-team offensive linemen, from the Buccaneers. And it's also important to note that the Buccaneers' offensive line is recently invested into, much like the Steelers' offensive and defensive lines. Of their recent years. You look back at the last few drafts from the Buccaneers, not this past year because they drafted Egbuka, Morrison, and Parrish with their top 3 picks. But in 2024, the same year that the Steelers got Troy Fautanu, the Buccaneers went and got Graham Barton, their current center, the guy out of Duke that some people thought the Steelers were going to get that year with the 26th overall pick. He was their first round pick. The year before that, while they got Kalijah Kancey in the first round, the next pick was Cody Mauch. Cody Mauch, I think he was a tackle, but he converted to guard for the Buccaneers. They got him in the second round. The year before that, they didn't have a first-round pick. They had 2 second-round picks, and they used one of those second-round picks on Luke Gadecki, another offensive lineman. I believe he plays right tackle. So there's 3 guys that the Buccaneers have put considerable draft compensation into getting in the first and second days of the draft over the last 4 years or so. And you saw that with the guys that they were able to bring to the table. And so I thought this was going to be a heck of a chance for this defensive front to test themselves, especially because we know Cam Hayward wasn't going to be playing with his holding. And plus, you wouldn't have Cam Hayward play in this game. It's just, he's 36. You don't need him. You know what he brings to the table. He's a 4-time first-team All-Pro. He got it. But I was curious, okay, how would Derrick Harmon and Keeanu Benton, specifically them, because they're the starters, they're the group that's going to be the biggest difference makers if the Steelers' run defense is going to be better. And I saw them win consistently when it came to this point during the Buccaneers preseason game. Bucky Irving ran the ball 8 times for 12 yards. That was the guy that they used a lot. And then even the guy that came after him, Sean Tucker, ran 4 times for 6 yards. The top 2 running backs that the Buccaneers were relying on in this game both averaged 1.5 yards per run, and combined they ran 12 times. That's dominance from the defensive front. And it's also important to note that they kept Derrick Harmon in a bit longer because they wanted to get him more reps. So he was part of that as well on both teams. And again, I think a big part of it was they were using their hands, establishing leverage. And again, you'll see this in the film study. I'm not allowed to put film on my channel here. Typically, no one's allowed to. The NFL can pop your channel for it, but we don't try to snitch on others. We just try to do our thing here. But we just don't want to get popped. But again, you can go to the Post-Gazette and see the film. But there were times where you saw the Buccaneers using double teams on both Benton and Harmon, and both of them just using their hands, stuffing the double team. And they didn't shed it, but their jobs were, hey, in this point in time, 2 defensive tackles were occupying 4 offensive linemen. And what happened on those plays when they did that? You see Cole Holcomb being like, oh, there's the run play, shoots through the gap, tackle in the backfield. Peyton Wilson, oh, there's the run play, shoots through the gap, gets in the backfield. And then even when they didn't shoot through the gap, they were able to say, okay, we're going to mind this gap. There was one play where I thought they did a really good job where I think it was Bucky Irving gets the ball in the middle. Harmon and Benton take on the double teams. They hold up those 4 offensive linemen, and you see Irving kind of say, okay, I'm going up the middle. Oh, nope, Holcomb's there. I'm going to the next up. Oh, no, Wilson's there. And when he tried to bounce it outside, DeMarvin Leal, who I'll also say had a good preseason game. I don't think DeMarvin Leal is going to make the team, but I thought he deserved credit for some of the hard work he put in this game. But DeMarvin Leal was playing the outside linebacker position on that side. He shed his man, brought Bucky Irving down. He was like, I was waiting for you to come to me the whole time. I thought that was a really good rep, and that's a moment where it was like the Buccaneers, their quicker running back, he was trying to find space, and even when he tried to bounce it outside, it's like, hey, the reason you couldn't do none of that was because the Steelers linebackers were able to fly freely. Also, Chuck Clark was shooting up in there. If the Steelers can get that kind of showing from their defensive front throughout this year, it is going to change how their defense is able to operate. And mind you, their defense still was a very good defense last year. When you look at how they performed, they were 5th in yards per attempt, 6th in total yards allowed as a rushing defense. So when people think back and they think, oh, the Steelers were so bad because of that playoff game. Look, they were bad in that playoff game for sure. But on the whole, they were a good rushing defense. And that was with the problems they had on the interior defensive line. I'm not saying, again, that it's fixed either. But if it is better, then that could go a long way to being a better run defense. And when you see the run defense kick in, and we know this from the best Tomlin teams and the best Cowher teams and the best Noel teams, so all the best Steelers teams, when the run defense is working like that, it allows the pass defense to be that much more aggressive. And when the pass defense is being that much more aggressive and you have serious playmakers in that part of your defense, like TJ Watt, like Cam Hayward, like Jalen Ramsey, and I even say, like Alex Highsmith, if he's back healthy soon, that's when you can really start being the best defense in football. That's when you can get in that range. You think back to that's what Casey Hampton and Aaron Smith did so well for those defenses. James Ferrier, Larry Foote, Lawrence Timmons, those inside linebackers over those years, they were kept so clean for most of games, and that allowed them to destroy the run and set up those 3rd and longs a lot of times where you saw Troy Polamalu could just kind of do whatever he wanted to do. James Harrison and Lamar Woodley could just pin their ears back and say, we're coming and you can't stop us. And they would send blitzes from different angles. But again, it's set up by being that physical group against the run. And so if Benton and Harmon can be those guys next to Cam Hayward. I'm fully expecting Cam Hayward to be ready by week 1, and this whole Holden situation won't be that big of a deal. But if they can be those forces next to him, and then the Steelers get like 1 or 2 other depth guys to be just decent in that role, and I think that they could have that in Y.A. Black, whereas he's not making big plays in these preseason games. I'm noticing him when they're trying to double team him, he's doing his job and just occupying, and I think that's why they went and got him. If they can get a Dan Aquale to be that kind of a role for as another rotational guy for this defensive line, and you have 5 guys that you're saying, hey, we trust you guys to win your one-on-ones consistently enough, or at least control the double teams to keep our linebackers clean, that could be a much bigger factor to the Steelers' success this year than people are talking about there. And so that's where the Steelers can be the Bullies if they are that kind of a team. But again, you got to do it consistently. Just because they did it against the Buccaneers doesn't mean they'll do it against the Panthers in this preseason game. Doesn't mean they'll do it against the Jets in week 1. It's got to be a consistent presence. But again, what we do here on this podcast, the Locked On Steelers podcast, we don't say, hey, they got it locked down. They're definitely going to be this. They're definitely going to be that. Or, they suck. They're terrible. They're definitely going to be bad. They're definitely going to be this or that. We take notes. We stack them. We compare our notes at the end of a period. We say, okay, how do they look now? And I think right now, when I look at how the defensive front has looked from the start of training camp to now, I'm seeing a steady climb upwards, and that's what you want. The same thing for the offensive line and pass protection. I've seen a steady climb upwards. Now, the one thing when it comes to back to being the Bullies part of this is I don't know if the run game has had really a steady climb upward. I think there's been moments where it's peaked up and then come back down. But if they can get the run defense there and the offensive line maybe just takes a little bit longer to get on their slopes where it's a steady upcline, that could be a big key to making this season better than where it has been the past 4 or 5 years, where they've been able to just make it into the playoffs and lose in the first round to a much better team. If they can do that, that could be a big sign for them moving forward. But as I talked about, I've been very curious why the Steelers haven't tested out their run game more, the first team run game more in this preseason. I'll talk about that more next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. Be right back. But first, remind you this show is also brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year because NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy this year. Me and Locked On Steelers listeners are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or you're a veteran making your millionth league. I've used Yahoo Fantasy for years, and the updates they're rolling out this month are wild in the best way. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team each week gets eliminated until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Let's make this fantasy season the best one yet, only at Yahoo Fantasy. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here today. I want to pull it back to a question, and I'm going to try to find a way to ask to Arthur Smith when we get him later today. Him and Terrell Austin are supposed to speak at the Steelers facility before practice for Monday. And I am curious as to why we haven't seen the run game for this first-team offense just tried a lot more in these early games. Now, I get it. They only have so many reps with the first team offense, but like, I get maybe saying like, hey, we're taking out Mason Rudolph because we know what he brings to the table. He's pretty solid there. We're not going to leave that guy in. But like, especially with how young this offensive line is, I just think it could behoove this team, even if you take out Mason Rudolph, if you're saying, hey, let's have a drive where we balance the rushing attack a little bit more into the factor. Because when I look at a lot of these early drives by the Steelers in these games, like you look back to the game against the Buccaneers, they come out, Kenneth Gainwell ran for a yard twice, and then they called a pass, Rudolph scrambled, and they went 3 and out. But then when they got the ball back, it was the deep ball to Roman Wilson. It was an incomplete pass, and then it was the pass interference, and then it was a touchdown. That's primarily how they move the ball. And I think if you look back to week 1 of the preseason, I think it was a very similar thing where they tried a few runs here and there, but they were primarily just moving the ball with just passing it. Going back to the drive chart of their first drive, first pass again, Roman Wilson, Mason Rudolph, big connection there. A quick pass to Skoranek, a pass to Roman Wilson again, a pass to Brandon Johnson. Their first run didn't come until 5 plays into the first drive of the Jaguars game, and then after that it was pass, run. I think they ran twice in a drive that was a 9-play touchdown drive. And again, that's not, I mean, hey, get it how you can, right? But that's not the offense that I thought this Steelers team was going to try to be this year. And it's fine if they're not that right now. It's the preseason. That doesn't matter. But I did think with this offensive line, there'd be more experimentation by Arthur Smith to say, hey, what is the run concepts? Because you need at least, I'd say, 3 or 4 that you want to be your bread and butter so you can mix it up and keep defenses guessing. What are the 3 or 4 run concepts that we can call that we know when we call this, we're getting 4 or 5 yards. We're winning this. I don't care who we're facing. Our guys are going to dig this one out. And I'm not sure if they found that yet, but I also don't feel like they haven't tried to in these games yet. Now, here's a theory that I have, and it's just my personal theory. This is not a source thing. This is not someone's told me this or suggested this to me. It's just my thinking through what naturally would make sense here. I wonder if, when you look back at the several Steelers teams with Najee Harris, the way the team defenses would play the Steelers was press up the line of scrimmage, stuff the run at all costs. Didn't matter what Najee Harris was not going to beat us. That's how a lot of defenses approached it. And the Steelers passing attack just wasn't good enough to force defenses out of considering that. And it never allowed what was either a bad offensive line or a meh offensive line to really create anything there. And so now that you have this better offensive line that I'm still not sure if they're past meh yet, they got to show that they are, but they certainly have been invested more into, and now they have, 2 first-rounders healthy, a second-rounder in his second year, a fourth-rounder that looks kind of promising after his first year. Now that they have those guys, I feel like it would behoove the Steelers to test this thing out a little bit more, to say, hey, let's put this on the road. Let's do a test drive. And I just don't know if we've seen that from them yet. And maybe there's things that they see that I don't, that they're like, hey, this is going to work out. Or maybe they're saying, hey, you know what's really important? We need to be able to pass to set up the run first, because if we can do that, then teams are going to have to back off the line of scrimmage. And then when they're backing off the line of scrimmage, now this young offensive line doesn't have to beat 8 guys all the time. They're beating 6 or 7 because teams are so worried about the passing game. And then, of course, like when you know the Steelers, they want to go in those 12 personnel, 13 personnel sets. For those who don't know what that means, that's two tight ends or 3 tight end formations. And when they're in those formations, teams may come out and say, oh, we got to get bigger. But if they're getting beat in the passing game while in those formations, and they're saying we got to get bigger, but we can't afford to get too big because we got to cover the pass game. And then all of a sudden you got a small lineup against a big lineup, and then the run game's going. And so my theory to why we haven't seen it just yet may just be Arthur Smith feels like it's a priority, and maybe not just Arthur Smith, maybe Mike Tomlin, maybe the whole team, maybe that's what they're trying to do. They feel like it might be a priority to find chemistry in what their younger receivers can do in the pass game. Because again, Aaron Rodgers isn't playing in these preseason games. He said this isn't the big deal. But I think what they're trying to do is, if they can find the passing concepts that work for them first and use those to open up parts of the offense and find success when teams are trying to play the run, then they're going to trust that that's going to be the factor that backs teams off and allows the run game to have to be able to find its footing against defenses that aren't being overly aggressive to pursue them and stuff the run. Because then when you're catching those teams off guard and you have that balance, that's when your offense can start to operate and just kind of control the pace of a game. And that's all the Steelers offense needs to do. They don't need to be number 1. They don't even need to be top 10. They don't need to be anything crazy. If they are the one thing I think that they need to be top 10 is they need to be top 10 in time of possession. If they can win time of possession, keep the ball in their hands, move the ball down the field, I think all those things would play into being the type of team that's going to let the defense, as it's currently built, be as great as it can be. And if they do those things in lockstep with each other, look out. I think that this is a team that wins 11 games in the regular season and at least wins a playoff game, maybe even 2. Still don't think they're a Super Bowl contender, even if all those things happen. But that's a question that I have for Arthur Smith that I'm going to try to get into this press conference when we get to talk to him, because to me, it should be a priority for the Steelers to try to get this run game going. But maybe their idea is right now they need this pass game to find its chemistry so that teams back off the run game. And then throughout the season, as the offensive line develops its chemistry, they're doing so not against loaded boxes and not against stacked boxes. And that's the factor that helps them figure it out. And like we said, that upward trajectory that you want to be steady and you want to actually start to hit the real progress by mid to late year, maybe that's a key that they're looking at. But hey, we'll ask Arthur Smith about that when we get to talk to him later today at the Steelers facility. I'm your host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter. You can follow me on all the social media platforms, TikTok, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, at Carter Critiques. It's my handle everywhere. You can also read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including that film study I was telling you about Derrick Harmon. Should be up hopefully around noon today-ish, where we'll see about that. But it's a Derrick Harmon film study and what he's improving at. Again, post-gazette.com for my work there. And as always, you can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. Back tomorrow after we talk to the Steelers coordinators and get to see them at practice right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.